I want to start off with a little story today. The story comes from a pretty famous little book. It's the Judeo Christian Bible. This comes from Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9. So I want to read it to you, and then I'm going to talk about it a little bit, and then we'll get into the rest of the lecture. Once upon a time, all the world spoke a single language and used the same words. As men journeyed into the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them hard." They used the bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. "Come," they said, "let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its tops with its top in the heavens, and make a name for ourselves, or we shall be dispersed all over the earth." Then the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which mortal men had built, and he said, "Here they are, one people with a single language, and now they have started to do this? Henceforward nothing they have a mind to do will be beyond their reach. Come, let us go down there and confuse their speech, so they will not understand what they say to one another." So the Lord from dispersed them from there all over the earth, and they left off building the city. This is why it is called Babel, because the Lord made a Babel of the language of all the world, and from that place the Lord scattered men all over the face of the earth. On its surface, this story has the fable or the folklore tale that explains why we have different languages, why people are all over the earth, why we have spread into different cultures. It has this purpose as a folktale. I'm leaving off here the whole religious aspect here of the story, the fact that it comes from what many people call their scripture, and instead just dealing with the folktale. This story explains language, it explains cultures, it explains the spread of humanity. Now, I'll go back for a moment to the religion. When I was taught this story, it was taught in a Southern Baptist conservative church. And it was often taught to me as a way of explaining why those people over there have that language, why they're so different. They're different because God punished us for trying to build a tower to him. In fact, this idea of building a tower to God was really emphasized in the story, that man could have such hubris, such false pride and ambition. But the story, the way that it's told, at least in the translation that I which is one of the authoritative translations, it's the New Oxford Bible. The story comes off a little bit differently than that. They said, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its tops in the heavens, and make a name for ourselves, or we shall be dispersed all over the earth." The people decided to come together and build this city, not necessarily because they had ambitions to reaching God, but because they wanted it to be so tall, a beacon to civilization, to build a civilization around it. They were worried that their society would fall apart, so they decided to build this thing that would bring society together. And then the Lord comes down and sees what they had built and gets worried. Oh my goodness, here they are, one people with a single language, and now they have started to do this. Henceforward, nothing they have a mind to do will be beyond their reach. The Lord gets worried. Remember, this is the Old Testament, and it's dealing with a notion of God that was not developed after this point. The Lord gets worried and decides to disperse them all, to give them all different languages, to spread them all over the earth, so that they could not come together collectively and build this thing that might reach towards him, that might show their power. The Lord was worried about the collective action of the others. It's a really cool story. Whatever your religious beliefs, it's a cool story that can explain many different things depending on who's doing the interpretation. And it's a good way for us to start off here today to talk about this idea of a philosophy that talks about, that gives us a way of relating to each other, a governance. We ended the first section of the course with Martin Buber and his I thou relationship. This idea of recognizing in the other something important and spiritual that makes you yourself more fulfilled. And in the course so far, we have looked at a few different ideas, starting with the I, the me. How do we recognize me? That started with education, what we learn about ourselves and freedom. But it also then moved into an epistemological argument about how do you know you are? How do you know what you are? We then move to God, or in gods. What is a God, and how do we justify if a God exists? And if the God does exist, what impact does that have on us? And we talked about different philosophers and what they might think about gods, as a way of thinking about the eschatology, the religious beliefs that surround us, and the reasons why we might or might not believe in those. And then we moved at the very end, through Martin Buber and through this epistemological responsibility, to this idea of you and me and us. And I've labeled these I, it, us. When I say God is it, I say that because it's this other, this thing that's outside of us. And for some people, it is a very real personal God. Other people, it's not. It's nothing they even want to think about or even worry about because it's not relevant to them. So it kind of works in this situation. I, it, thus, us. Why do relationships matter? Well, relationships matter because we have an I. We can substantiate an I, and things get murky after that. How do I know you are real? How do I know that you matter? How do I know that it matters? How do I know that there's this God that matters? I is pretty solid. Outside of that, it gets a little murky. But some philosophers have come up with the idea that we can see that there are other people. We can see that there are existences outside of ourselves. And if there are existences outside of ourselves, then relationships must matter. The ways we build relationships with each other matters. And one-on-one, that's a fairly easy relationship to build. We either can stand next to each other safely. We are in a violent relationship with each other where we cannot be safe with the other, but they're still there. We are in a loving relationship where we can not only stand next to each other, but we can touch each other safely. We make these decisions about how we are going to relate to each other one-on-one. It gets more complicated when it's one and many, or many and many, to try to figure out how relationships work. And that's why we have a socio-political philosophy, a philosophy that grows not just out of who we are as individuals or whether or not gods exist or why we should relate to each other and what that does for the individual, but what is this thing that we are when we come together in a group? Who are others in relation to me? Do we need others? How do we need others if we need them? What is the best way for me to be in relationship with others? And how can I trust others? These are all really important questions for socio-political philosophy. And one of the things to point out here is that we have a whole field of study called sociology. And we have a whole field of study called political science. And both of those fields of study are very important. And they have their own particular, really well-developed and detailed answers to these questions. Philosophy is what some people would say the grounding of those fields, that most of liberal arts comes out of philosophy, and it wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have this way of going and answering things in a sociological way or a political science way if we didn't have philosophy. Philosophy doesn't try to get as particular with sociological theory or political science theory. Instead, it just tries to answer questions about what does this mean that we have others in the world and that we have to learn to exist. Well, we've got some answers that we were looking at this week. The first is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes is a philosopher who came up with this idea of the Leviathan, this beast of a society. And Hobbes bases his idea on a few ideas where he comes up with a social organization. The first idea is that the world is dangerous. There are bears out there. There's a whole ocean. There may be foreigners, people over there from another land that we don't know and we can't, and that want to kill us. The world is dangerous. And frankly, even our neighbors can be dangerous. We don't know if we should trust our neighbors. This is because others cannot be trusted. I can't really know your mind. I don't know if I can trust you. But because we don't want to exist in that state of fear and threat, because we don't want our safety to be always challenged, we must huddle together for safety. I cannot exist in this world alone. The bears are too strong. The ocean is too vast. I can't be alone in the world. So we have to huddle together for safety. And it's not enough for me to rely on my wife to protect me. It's not enough for me to rely on my kids because they're weak to protect me. It's not enough for me to even rely on my family because, there's just too many things out there. We've got to huddle together as a neighborhood, as a community, as a city, as a state, as a nation. We must huddle together for safety. But because we're all going to huddle together, we can't all talk at once. We can't all try to make decisions at once. We need a leader. And for Hobbes, this is where Hobbes is particular. Because the world is dangerous, because we can't trust anybody, we need a leader who is strong. One who can take all of us people who we can't necessarily trust, and put us together under one strong voice who can guide us. Now, we know people, right? We know that there are selfish people. We know that there are narcissistic people. We know that people lie. So how can we possibly trust a leader to lead us? Here's where the leader becomes important for Hobbes. The leader matters because he brings us cohesion, or she brings us cohesion, allows us to come together with some relative safety. If the leader doesn't do that, then the leader won't be leader for very long, because ultimately what we need is our safety, and we will make a decision not to give our consent to be governed. The leader must pay attention to the people and make sure the people's needs are met to some extent. Now, ultimately, the leader could be greedy. The leader could be out for herself. The leader could be unfair and like some people more than others. But as long as collectively our needs are mostly met, well, then that's okay. The strong are not bound by the same rules as us. They are, through the position of their leadership, allowed certain privileges as long as they take care of our basic needs and we all don't get collectively upset. This is a philosophy of how society is governed and what we need to do to make sure that society keeps on being governed. It's okay to have a strong leader. It's okay to give up your will for that strong leader, so long as your basic needs are met. Rousseau comes along and has a different idea. Rousseau agrees with Hobbes that society is kind of messed up. It's flawed. We can't necessarily trust society. We can't necessarily trust others. Others have their own interests in front of ours. But Rousseau goes about this a different way. He recognizes that as individuals, we have rights and we have desires, we have needs. But he also sees that if we just get rid of a society as individuals to protect our own individual rights, desires, and needs, then we're going to lose them. Now, I often, when I'm driving through the country, think, oh, why don't I just move up to that mountain and get away from everybody? You may do this too, right? You get so tired of hearing other people's cell phones ring, other people talking on their cell phones. You get so tired of traffic. You get so tired of having to pay taxes. Sometimes it's a fantasy to look out there to the island that's in the middle of the ocean and say, why don't I just live there? I won't have to put up with all this. But once we do that, we have given up all of our rights anyway, because now all we have is survival. We just have to survive. So we no longer have a right to speaking freely, or we no longer have a right to having free association with others. We no longer have a right to live and thrive and make money, because none of those things matter. All that matters is survival. So if we don't have a society we live in, rights become immaterial. But the weird thing is, once we decide to live in a society, we have to decide that I'm going to give up some of my rights. I'm going to give up some of my needs, some of my desires. I can't decide that I want all the chocolate in the world, because once I do that, I have taken away some of your desire to want all the chocolate in the world. So you and I and all the people around us, all those people with annoying cell phones, all those people who need taxes in order to pay for healthcare, everybody around us, we have to decide to give up our rights to each other. I will give up my individual claim on rights to you, and you will give up your individual claim on rights to me. And we're going to trust that in doing that, we have reciprocity. That is, if I give up my rights to you, I can trust that you're going to give up your rights to me. Why? Because I know that ultimately I could grab my rights back and I could try to kill you. Or you could grab your rights back and try to kill me. And what we have to have trust in is that both of us know that thing. We both know that we need to live in a society together, because we don't want to be out on an island or out in the woods just relying on survival. So we give up our rights to each other and say, we will make a decision together about what our wants, needs, and desires are, what our rights are. Now, because we're going to make this decision together, we also can decide on who our leader is going to be, because we do kind of need a leader. Again, if we're all in the room together just talking, it's going to get confusing. We're all going to just be talking to each other, not listening to each other. Nothing's going to work. We need a leader to help guide that discussion. So the leaders are chosen by us as a group to represent all. And in this, when we allow this to happen, we have power over that leader. We have power over each other, just as we have no power because we've given up all of our rights. It's a weird construction, but what it ultimately does is it allows us to regain our autonomy, our individuality, our rights, our being, because we've made an agreement to each other to honor the other, honors the other's autonomy. And the only way we can do that is by giving up our rights and then expecting them back. That's Rousseau. We then have Marx, who comes along. And Marx says, hey, Hobbes, you're right, people suck. And hey, Rousseau, it's cool, you want people to be together. But the problem is that society, we have to figure out why society is actually corrupt. And it's corrupt because it's built on economic power. It's built on money. And the ways that people gain that money, it's always going to lead to a selfishness and a desire for control. It's going to lead to power, because when we base everything on money and production, we're basing it on a value that only a few can actually profit from. And so what ends up happening is we are all individuals. We all have our rights, but our freedom and our production power is extracted for the profit of leaders. We don't even have a choice in this. We give up our freedoms. I decide I'm going to go to work today. I give up my freedom when I do that so that I can get a little bit of money. And then that leader who's at that work is getting a whole lot more money just from me being there. We give up our freedom and we give up our ability to produce for our own good, for others. So the leaders can profit. And when they profit, they become powerful because they control wealth and they control property. When the leaders are allowed to profit off the work of the people, we give up our rights and they are completely controlled by the leaders, whether or not we agreed to that. In this situation, people have no power or wealth as individuals. We can't control anything because we have to exist in this world with a power that we didn't agree to, that we need to work for in order to be able to survive, or in order to be able to get the things that we want. Marx comes to the conclusion then that society, this agreement that we have together to live together next to each other, can only really be just, can only really be fair once the people own it collectively. You may love your house, you may love your land, but once you start to own more than other people, you are no longer just and fair. So we need to own our land collectively. We need to own our goods collectively. We need to own the means of production collectively. Once we can do that, once we can recognize that economic power should be shared across all the people, then we can really lead to a just and fair society. There's a lot more. You hear a lot about the Communist Manifesto and communism, which we read for this week, about the evilness of it, or the ways people fear it, or people say that it will never work. But the basic idea here is a way of thinking about the socio-political founding of our society and what really matters in our society. And while we might disagree with Marx's conclusion that this is going to lead to a violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat, we might disagree with that. The basic ideas here are matter, that there is a powerful, and they maintain power by holding all the wealth and by extracting even more wealth from us through our labor. Sociopolitical philosophy matters because it provides a recognition of the social contract. And that's an important idea, the social contract. Hobbes, Rousseau, Marx, John Locke, Mill, most philosophers who are working in this realm agree that there is a social contract. Because how do we ever drive on the same road with another person unless we believe that there's some kind of social contract? So social political philosophy provides that. It provides a rationale for governance. Why should I ever pay taxes? Now, for many of us, these questions don't ever arise, right? We just get taxes taken out of our paycheck. But there has to be some kind of rationale for that. There has to be some kind of rationale for why I would follow the rules, that I can't go into this building at this time when, I think this is just the world, I exist in it. There has to be a rationale for governance. And then there have to be guidelines for governance. There have to be ways that governance should happen and how it shouldn't happen based on individuals and society. And we have to be able to assess governance. Is governance working for us? Is the way that our society is functioning really leading to a society that we want? Which leads us to a sense of justice and fairness. That society should ultimately be just and fair. And we can look at many places that have erupted in violence in the past couple years, where we can see places where justice and fairness are not functioning, where one group of people feel like their rights, their being, their wealth is more important than another group of people's rights, being, and wealth. So much so that you can decide to drop a bomb on people without caring at all about what happens, just because you want to protect your own wealth. What socio-political philosophy gives us is a sense of being able to say, that is unjust, That is unfair, and we need to figure out a way to make it just and fair. Then ultimately, this also can lead us back to the individual and what is ethical for the individual. What should I do or what shouldn't I do on the basis of ethics? We're going to talk about ethics next week. This week, we're reading these three authors, these three thinkers, and we're thinking about socio-political philosophy. We're having a party. Hobbes, Rousseau, and Marx have different conceptions of what a person is. But ultimately, what they're trying to do is say, we want to live in a society where we work collectively to build our towers so that we can maintain our society. How do we best do that? How do we best work together to make sure we have a safe society that protects all individuals? All three are working on the same project, which makes some people upset, which makes the powers that be upset, which makes those with money, the leaders, upset, which may make the gods upset. And so they do what they can to disrupt this notion of collectivity, of the power of the people, of the power of us to be able to come together and decide why you matter and why I matter and why we should live together in harmony. Keep working this week. Keep working on the writing that you're doing. Keep working on the reading that you're doing, the projects that you're working on. There's a lot of stuff happening. We're getting closer to the end of the semester, so make sure you're staying focused. Let me know if you have any questions.